Hi, my name's Gary Woodman. I'm Chief Executive of the Worcestershire Local Enterprise Partnership, and this is part of the Making Connections session that we're trialling here, but working really with Harrison Clark Rickerbys, your local solicitors across the three counties. I'm here with John, Jane and Jack, who are now going to introduce themselves, but we're really going to be talking about the kind of residential property market during the current COVID-19 crisis. So, John.
Oh, hi, I'm Jonathan Cook. I'm a partner and owner of Flint & Cook. We're estate agents and chartered surveyors with offices in Hereford, Bromyard and Ross-on-Wye.
Jane?
Hello, yes, I'm Jane McLaughlin. I am a senior associate working with the real estate team in Hereford, part of the three counties.
And Jack?
Hi, I'm Jack Brayo. I work for Oakley Independent Mortgages Limited, based in Droitwich.
I mean, that's great, and it's good to be here discussing this with you in slightly same circumstances, and certainly we're giving this a test today. But I suppose getting straight into the questions that have come through from Harrison Clark Rickerbys, really about the residential property side, I suppose it's a bit, times are unsure, and therefore, can I still buy or sell my home? John, and what's the latest guidance?
Well, the latest guidelines are a bit mixed, and we're all having to sort of play it a little bit by ear in truth. The government have said that anyone wanting to move home, whether a buyer or a seller, should really delay the transaction where possible, whilst the coronavirus stay-at-home measures are still in place. We are still trying to be operative. We've closed our offices, but key members are working from home, trying to liaise with the local solicitors, particularly Harrison Clark Rickerbys, to try to get as many deals through as we can. There are still plenty of people who want to move. Some have got unrealistic expectations. Others are a little bit more realistic and are prepared to work with each other to try and get through to a completion when we can.
And I would second that in so much, Gary, as we are still opening files, still able to progress matters, so that sales, for example, that Jonathan will have negotiated 4 to 5 weeks ago, we can still progress, we can still report to clients, still get searches in, mortgage offers are still arriving, but it's when we get to the point of actually moving you into the property, actually completing, that we are then faced with the changing situation as a result of the new government guidance. And that's when we need to either press pause or, well, generally press pause unless you're moving into an empty property.
Okay. Yeah, and it's much the same from my end as far as the purchase applications, that a new build property is very much full steam ahead. But if there's any chain involved where cleaning of property needs to go on, or solicitors are recommending to not move or proceed with the purchase unless the properties are vacant. So it's much the same here at my end.
And certainly, kind of looking at that kind of long-term economic impact, if I suddenly decide, actually, probably this isn't the time for me to kind of buy that house, what sort of advice would you give me?
John, stepping in now, my advice would be, a lot of people haven't raised this matter with me, and I'm saying just pause. If you're unsure, just pause. If you're a buyer, talk to the vendor, talk through the agent, try and pause things. And this is perhaps where the mortgage lenders can get involved and maybe give an extended mortgage offer. Talk to people. People are concerned that prices might come down. They may not. We'll talk about that a bit later. But generally speaking, my advice to people is don't panic, don't rush into anything, take stock of things, and hopefully everything will be okay. But there will be inevitably some delays.
It's actually quite interesting how for a fair few years people have been moaning about how the UK housing market works in the way that you purchase a house, and essentially it's all gentleman's agreement until exchange takes place. But it's proving very useful in today's climate to be able to just hit the pause button, and nobody can do anything if you decide pre-exchange of contract to not sell your house anymore. So you have to use that strength. If you don't want to proceed, you don't necessarily have to.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And I think the kind of, if that buyer's unwell or suddenly self-isolating, I think getting somebody to move, as we said, the market kind of stopped, but actually that pause and that just kind of stepping back is really helpful. I don't know, Jane, from a kind of the solicitor's point of view, does that also kind of play out?
long as you haven't entered into a legally binding contract, then you have the option of withdrawing. We're doing the same thing. We're encouraging our sellers and buyers not to make any rash decisions, especially where they've paid out for searches and we've done all due diligence on the file. In all reality, I think John would agree with this, they're not likely to sell to anyone else in the current climate. No one else can view the property realistically, and therefore unless they know their personal situation has changed to such an extent that they can't proceed, then a pause is as good as anything, because everyone's in the same boat. A lot of people are in exactly the same boat. If you have exchanged contracts, then it's a different scenario. You are legally bound to purchase that property on the completion date that you've agreed. Now, in that scenario, where you're caught in this very awkward in-between position, the government are encouraging solicitors, buyers and sellers to agree a delayed completion date to a point where the restrictions are likely to be lifted. That's not an easy prognosis to make. And then what we would do is also build in a cushion period at the end of that time when the restrictions end, perhaps a 2-week, 3-week period, to enable everyone to then reorganise their removals, ensure that their mortgage is in place, etc. But if you can't agree a change to the completion date, then you are bound to complete on that date. And therefore, buyers and sellers must consider very carefully when they enter into an exchange and completion at the present time, because there's so many uncertainties.
I think that delay, if I've got a sort of mortgage in place, what sort of impact would that have, Jack?
Your mortgage offer is issued with a expiry date on it. The government are encouraging, I think I'm right in saying, Jack, encouraging most lenders now to agree a 3-month extension, certainly on those situations where you've already committed to an exchange of contracts. They will extend your mortgage offer by an extra 3 months, and we've had further emails through in the last couple of weeks from Help to Buy saying very much the same thing to us.
All
so
of the lenders.
That's where mortgage offers are extended. Yeah. They're all saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's really helpful. Just giving you, so it kind of gives you that extension and time to kind of think, but equally means that if that kind of mortgage offer is in place, at least you know that you secured that for a period of time during these circumstances.
Harry, can I just ask a quick question of both Jane and Jack? Because we had an interesting scenario last week. On Thursday, we had a couple who had been advised they were going to exchange and complete on Thursday. They were moving into an empty property. Their buyer was coming from a matrimonial breakup and had her mortgage monies drawn down, all ready to go, but her deposit was coming from her ex-husband who had mortgaged his property. The money was agreed, but the Nationwide Building Society weren't able to release it because they said they were short-staffed, things were really busy, really difficult, and they were prioritising first mortgages of first-time buyers and clean mortgages, whereas second mortgages were deemed to be priority. Is that something you've come across, either of you?
I mean, as far as the delays from my end are concerned, the delays that I've had have been with processing of applications that aren't at offer stage. As far as drawdown of monies, I've been told by the business development manager at Nationwide I've been speaking to today about it, and they are concentrating on completions, like their staff are more concentrated on the completions. I don't see why that one would have fell by the wayside.
No, I mean, they are all advising us. So when you get your mortgage offer, your lender will say, we need 7 clear working days, or we need 5 clear working days. Each lender is slightly different. Now, every now and again, we will get an email from a lender, an update saying, actually, stick strictly to the timetable, or it's been extended and we now need 9 clear working days. In that scenario, you would, generally speaking, we request the monies the day before we anticipate completion anyway, because lenders can send monies in very late in the day on the day of completion, which is not always of great use to us all. So we generally request funds for the day before. And in the current climate, more so than any, we would also keep in contact with the lender throughout that request period to make sure that they've received our request and that they were actioning it, and that we knew, and it didn't come as a surprise to us on the Thursday that we didn't have the funds, that we could therefore anticipate issues beforehand. But it is a changing climate, isn't it? It's extraordinary times that we're in, and this is why we have to be so very careful, because there's constant changing. You know, the landscape's constantly changing around us. But I think, you know, what they did was the right thing, which was aim for a simultaneous completion on the Thursday, so that there was no risk no other risk to the client. But obviously there was some inconvenience there. But I haven't come across that, John, previously. But I think you've just got to keep in touch. You've got to be flexible. You've got to be keeping in touch with your lenders all the time and making sure that they're actioning and dealing. And if there is any delay, that you know about it before the day.
The problem that you've got at the moment as well, John, is the fact that brokers even have very little ability to contact the people that are important within those lenders. So certainly for Nationwide and also the Mortgage Works, which are part of the same group, my only point of contact currently is my business development manager. I cannot get through to speak to the individual processors or the people that are releasing the funds. And even the business development manager has limited access to updates because of just the current climate.
I think they're short-staffed, aren't they? That's part of the problem. Yeah. But if ever this lockdown period has highlighted to me the need for solicitors, estate agents, mortgage brokers, everyone to work together, it's it. We've never experienced anything like it. And normally things go through in a certain way. We're having to think, all of us, outside of the box a bit at the moment, aren't we?
I think it will positively improve communication between solicitor, broker, estate agent and lender. I think there'll be certainly looked at how we communicate.
Certainly, you know, ways of working and those conversations and how we perhaps, you know, put in those kind of communication chains actually probably give us a chance going forward to kind of perhaps reflect the way we work. I don't know what you think about that.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, we've had incidents, sorry, John, we had incidents in the last probably 10 days where ordinarily we have, you know, a telephone number that we ring. You may have to wait 10 minutes. You know, that 10 minutes is now escalated to what could be 30, 40 minutes waiting for an answer. And a few lenders were actually saying that they were not speaking to solicitors. They didn't have the capacity. They would talk to clients, but they weren't speaking to solicitors, which was really unnerving, because when you've requested funds for a completion, like I said earlier, we need to know they're in. But you know, they're in uncharted territories themselves, and I suspect, you know, they turn up for work one day and half the work staff aren't in. They're adapting to changing scenarios just as we all are. But you know, this is why the only way really to exchange and complete at the moment, unless it's a vacant property, and even if it is a vacant property, is really to go for a simultaneous, so that you know that you've got everything lined up, ready to complete as far as you can.
Okay, and if you get to that completion point, but then suddenly the seller comes in and says, actually, I'd like you to do, sorry, the buyer comes in and says, I'd like you to deep clean that property. What can you do at that point?
You are not contractually bound to deep clean a property unless it's inserted into the contract, unless there's a specific clause, a special condition added to the contract, then there's no obligation on you to deep clean your property. I did a bit of research and I could see that the government have issued some advice on deep cleaning in non-healthcare environments, and I think that's probably the only advice really you can follow, but certainly you're not contractually bound.
We were asked that question last week, and My vendor literally couldn't do it, not necessarily because of financial reasons. And my advice was just give the property as good a clean as you can. Let the buyers know that's what you're doing. And if they want a deep clean to be done, they can do it and they're able to. In this case, there were people living in rented accommodation, so they didn't have to be in by a certain time into the new property. We suggested that they were able to do their own deep clean between the period of completion and when they wanted to move in. The other implication, of course, for if my client had agreed to do the deep clean, but for the buyers to pay for it, what would happen if the deep cleaning company came in and one of their members had COVID-19 and infected the property? That could lead to its own problems. So I think in this case, I would agree with Jane that you're not contractually bound at all and just do the best you can.
Pretty helpful. And I think, yeah, those kind of requests are where that causes the delay or equally makes people kind of nervous, I think. Obviously, getting into that kind of rent and landlord, and it seemed as though some emergency legislation was passed that said if a tenant does get into financial difficulty because of their job and work situation, where's the position on that, Jane, at the moment?
It's not my area, but I did a bit of research for you, Gary, and I found out that the Coronavirus Act 2020 protects most tenants and secure licensees in the private and social rented sectors by putting measures in place that say where landlords do need to issue notices seeking possession, the notice period must be for 3 months. So that's the change. Landlords can choose to give a longer notice period. So from the 27th March, any claims in the system or about to go into the system will be affected by a 90-day suspension of possession hearings and orders. And at the end of that 3-month notice, a landlord cannot force a tenant to leave their home without a court order. So they still need to go through that scenario. But the guidance, the government guidance again in this area is communication, flexibility, encouraging landlords to communicate with their tenants to find a way forward. Tenants are still contractually bound to pay their rent. Obviously, if their financial circumstances change to such an extent that that's not possible, then again, government guidance is saying, keep in touch with your landlords, try and work out a payment method that works for you both. But in the meantime, you are protected. You have a 3-month grace period because of the changes under the Coronavirus Act. So that's the action the government's taken.
I think that's a really important point to clarify as well and repeat, is we had a lot of problems in the market of people cancelling their mortgage direct debit payments to their lenders, assuming that that's what it meant to have a mortgage payment holiday. And I think it's much the same as far as the renters. It's important to say that you're not getting free rent, you're deferring your rent payments. So it's important to communicate with the landlord to basically tell them that they can't afford the rent, to try and come to an arrangement. And if you can't, if you then fail to make the payments, the landlord is within his right to seek those back payments later.
John?
Gary, sadly it is my field because we manage 400 properties and I've spent the last 3 weeks dealing with exactly these types of inquiries. And the guidance, James correctly spelt out the legal perspective, but the guidance from the government to us all is to encourage our landlords to work with the tenants. That's the phrase they use, to work with them, which basically means every individual case needs to be treated separately. And I've had 50 or 60 examples this week of people saying that they've got difficulty to pay the rent. And some of these cases are genuine, 100% genuine. People who need help, we've recommended them for universal credit. We've spoken to our landlords about, as Jack said, deferring payments, but still being responsible for their rent, and that's the important thing. Or in some cases, I've had a landlord has been served notice by his tenant. She's self-employed, has not been working in the UK for more than a year, doesn't think she'll get any support. My landlord said, look, don't move out, stay on, don't pay the next month's rent. If you vacate the property, I've got to pay the bills, and I won't be able to get another tenant for a couple of months anyway. So I would rather have you there, try and work with you, hoping that you get yourself back on your feet. you stay and you respect that I've treated you well and you'll continue to look after the property as your own home. Other landlords have said, no, that's it, tough, you pay the rent, you know, that's it, there's no quarter given. Others are giving 20% off if the people have been furloughed and can prove that they've been furloughed. So some people may inevitably, I don't want to cast aspersions, but you know, we're asking people to see evidence of their situation so that we know that it is genuine. One landlord, a bit harsh this week, has said to me that I've got the furlough agreement for the tenants and I've suggested that maybe he reduce the rent by 20% for a couple of months. And he said, well, no, because in Herefordshire, and the same would be in Worcestershire, the local farmers are advertising for fruit pickers and they're desperate for seasonal workers. And if you've been furloughed, you are able to do another job. So his attitude is the old Prescott, well, not Prescott, who was it? The Conservative politician, get on your bike and get some more work. A bit harsh, but maybe there's the truth in that.
Yeah. No, a bit of a challenge there. So I think it's really worth that conversation, isn't it? In terms of, you know, that position from both the landlord and the tenant's position. It's about a conversation and finding a situation that works for both.
I've had similar comments from clients just about the furlough, saying that they're spending 20% less of their income by being inside, so why should the rent reduce? They can still afford it because of their day-to-day expenditure decreasing. That's
a comment I've had with quite a few people recently as well. And again, one of my landlords actually did a drive-by of the property, his rental property, to check on something. He saw they had a satellite dish outside and asked me to speak to the tenant to say that perhaps they should consider cancelling their satellite TV. And to which they replied, well, we haven't got it. That was a previous tenant's satellite dish. So I couldn't go in to check, could I? Because of the current restrictions.
So, yeah, it just shows that conversation is really important. And what sort of advice is coming through sort of the national bodies like the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors? Are they sort of helping during this time?
I mean, both the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors and the National Association of Estate Agents, ARLA, the ARLA and National Association of Traders Property Mark, I have to say have been fantastic. And to the webinars, and I've been watching webinars day in, day out, and in terms of guidance, we couldn't have had more. However, there is still this uncertainty. This week, or last week on Thursday, the RICS produced their monthly report, and it wasn't great. It didn't make great reading, but it stated the obvious, that property sales for March are significantly down, and they don't expect that to improve for 3 months. Well, we know that's the case, but the general industry hope is that, you know, for all matters, when we get through the next few months, we'll come through it with a vengeance, and I think we will.
About the sort of from the mortgage broker's point of view, is there a trade body there, Jack, that's kind of giving advice and guidance?
I mean, we're mainly being led by what else is happening in the market. So valuers not going out and new business effectively is grinding to a halt. But that's mainly because of valuers not going out and valuing the property.
Okay.
There are apparently small independent valuers that are still going out. But the main lenders that you're wanting to deal with have not only limited the loan to values that they're lending at for new property, but also countrywide, and those sorts of valuers aren't going out. So unless they can do the desktop vals, you're paused whether you like it or not.
Yeah, I had one recently where we'd had a valuation done right at the outset, and I think it was a desktop valuation in this instance, and my clients had then had a survey done which builds in a valuation towards the end, and very often we're reporting to lenders throughout the transaction of things we find during when we're looking through the title that we need to notify them of to make sure that they are happy to proceed in those circumstances. And some of these matters will go to value, so it will go to the valuer. And in this one instance, the valuer needed then to revisit the property, and they would not accept the independent valuation. And so that was one that was put on hold, unfortunately. And so, yes, we are finding that increasingly And we're trying to encourage where we can for them to accept desktop valuations, but that's their remit, isn't it? It's their bag, really. But I've also seen this week, John, about the RICS alert, which was in relation to the valuations that are carried out. The qualification, I think, that they've added to their valuations, haven't they, with regard to because we're in unprecedented times. I think they've said it's not so much as a disclaimer, but rather a disclosure. So I presume what that would mean, therefore, is that the valuation would stand, but the background information is we are in unprecedented times, and please take this on board when you're looking at this valuation.
I think it's also because of the uncertainty as to what's going to happen to prices that I think the institutions are covering themselves by saying, look, things could change drastically in a few weeks or a few months' time. I really don't think they will, but they're hedging their bets.
So, $1 million question right at the end is, so you're the Chancellor of the Exchequer now. Obviously, economic recovery is the tune and getting the housing market going. What's the measure that you would kind of want to see and put in place? And perhaps starting with John.
My honest view is that once we get through this, there's going to be a lot of pent-up demand anyway. I think a lot of people still want to move, and both Jane, Jack and I know this. There's still people out there who want to move, but just can't. So I do think a lot of properties have come off the market, have come off Rightmove, Zoopla on the market. There may even be a shortage of property. So I do think there will be a bit of a spike. The obvious thing we'd like the Chancellor to look at is stamp duty, and it's a continual problem. Year on, year out, and I think if the market doesn't recover as we would like it to, then I think the Chancellor must look at the stamp duty thresholds, but probably more important, go back to a stamp duty holiday period where, as a last resort, to be honest with you, because they need the income, they're going to need all the income they can get to fund the benefits and the grants we're getting now. But I think as a last resort, they need to give a stamp duty honeymoon.
Okay. Jane?
Yeah, I think that would be a good incentive for people to move forward. And I have still got plenty of buyers and sellers that want to progress but can't because they're in a chain. They might be moving into a vacant property themselves. So I agree with John that once these restrictions are lifted, we will see a surge in activity, and our job is to make sure that clients are in a position that once those restrictions are lifted, they can proceed quickly and easily. And I think probably all those people that are now at home who are thinking of buying and selling, or thinking of selling in the future, they can use this time to decorate their properties, to put together their paperwork, get their planning documents together, get their electrical certificates together. You can use your time really well in this interim period to get your property with that curbside appeal. And if you've got time to do that, then once the property market opens, then you'll be in a great position moving forward, because it will reopen, the floodgates will, the restrictions will stop, and we will resume normality. But it's just being flexible and having a bit of patience during this interim period. And so it's a good position that we will be in once this all stops.
Great. Jack?
It's the same with me. I like to remain optimistic in these times. I'm still getting emails regarding purchases. I'm still doing remortgage business. It's not all doom and gloom. People aren't thinking that this is the end of the housing market. It is very much putting the pause button on. I think the government have done well with the furloughing scheme that they've put into place. I think they have missed the boat with a few of the small limited companies, but I think people's savings are potentially still protected, especially for the first-time buyers. I don't think most chains will be affected. I think we can get through it and purchases can continue, and hopefully we won't be in this dip for very long. Hopefully they'll come out the other end of it soon.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, certainly as to be expert, I've learned plenty as we've had the discussion. It's been really interesting and useful, and I think as this gets published again, it will be something that we can look back on and probably think, wow, that was a good try. It was a trial that we had a good discussion. But for and I think we can probably come back to this kind of topic in about 3 to 6 months. And it'd be interesting to see the changes that have happened. So that certainly I'd welcome that discussion as we go forward. But for now, stay safe and stay at home. Thank you all.